Ever feel like your vote hardly makes a difference?
Like it's all rigged.
Yeah, exactly. Like the whole system. I don't know.
Broken.
Broken. Well, get this. Imagine nearly half LF of everyone just saying, nope, not even going to bother, and sitting out the elections entirely.
Wow.
That's exactly what happened in Italy back in 2019, and it's what sparked this whole wild theory we're diving into today.
Really? Half of all Italians?
44% didn't vote in the European elections.
That's wild. I mean, that's got to be some kind of record, right?
Huge EE. It's huge. And this theory we're looking at today, theory of the guardian force, argues this is a symptom of a much bigger problem.
Not just in Italy either, right?
Right. In democracies around the world.
And the problem, according to this theory's author, Aurelio Mustaccioli, isn't just like bad politicians or corrupt officials.
It's deeper than that.
It's something much more fundamental, he says.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What's this fundamental problem?
It all comes down to this idea that governments have a tendency to keep growing.
To get bigger.
Yeah, to take on more and more power, regardless of who's in charge. It's like this invisible force pushing them to expand, even when they say they want to shrink.
So no matter who you vote for, you just end up with a bigger government.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
Kind of a depressing thought, isn't it?
It's the feeling Mustaccioli wants to challenge. He argues that traditional political parties, whether they're on the left or the right, get caught in this trap.
What?
Of promising more.
More what?
More spending, more programs, more intervention.
Because that's how they get elected.
They do it to win votes, but in doing so, they just end up feeding the beast.
So the vicious cycle, right?
Exactly.
But how do we even measure this government growth? How do we know it's actually happening?
It's a good question.
And not just, a feeling.
Well, Mustaccioli uses this really interesting metric called the nationalization index. Basically, it's the percentage of a country's wealth that's controlled by the government.
So a higher nationalization index means
more government.
The government has their fingers in more pies.
Yeah, exactly. And Mustaccioli argues that in a democracy, this index, it tends to go up over time, regardless of which party is in power. Think of it like this. You're a politician, right, and you're running for office.
Okay.
You need to get votes to win, right?
Makes sense.
And most voters, generally speaking, they like the idea of more benefits, more services, more government help, right? So even if you, as a politician, believe in smaller government, you're incentivized to promise more spending to win.
So you're telling me even politicians with good intentions,
they get caught in the same trap.
They might end up making the problem worse.
That's right.
And if traditional parties are part of the problem, what's the solution?
That's where things get really interesting. Mustaccioli proposes this radical idea. A guardian force.
A guardian force sounds kind of ominous now.
Yeah, a little bit, right?
Like some kind of, I don't know, like a fighting force dedicated to, shrinking the government?
That's the idea, kinda, but
okay.
It's not what you think.
So not a paramilitary group then?
No, nothing like that.
Okay, good.
This is all about peaceful, democratic change.
Okay.
Mustaccioli's not talking about some kind of coup d'etat or anything.
All right, so what is it then?
So he's saying, imagine this, a diverse group of people from all walks of life, all united by one single goal.
And that goal is bringing down that nationalization index we talked about.
Right.
Making government smaller.
Exactly. They're not fighting over specific policies.
Right.
They're laser focused on shrinking the size and scope of the government itself.
Okay, I get the goal.
Right.
But how do they actually do that? It's not like they're going to storm Parliament. Right?
No, definitely not. Mustaccioli's theory is all about working within the system, but in a strategic way.
Strategic how?
Imagine the guardian force as almost a voting bloc.
Okay.
It could be, business owners fed up with regulations, taxpayers feeling squeezed, or just everyday people who feel like the government is just too big, too much in their business.
Yeah, okay, I'm starting to see it. So they all come together and flex their voting muscles and force the politicians to pay attention.
That's the idea.
Okay, but what are they actually advocating for? And what are the concrete things they want to change?
Well, this is where Mustaccioli's theory gets really interesting and controversial, to be honest.
Okay.
One of his most radical ideas is to amend the Italian Constitution to include the right of secession.
Whoa, secession. Like letting regions break away from the country entirely.
That's right.
That seems a little extreme, don't you think? I mean, isn't that how countries fall apart?
It seems counterintuitive, but Mustaccioli actually sees it as a way to make the central government more accountable, not less.
Okay, I'm listening. How so?
Think of it this way. If the government knows that regions can just up and leave if they're
Oh,
unhappy, they're going to be a lot more careful about overtaxing them, over-regulating them, you know?
right.
It's an incentive to keep that nationalization index low because nobody wants to be the government in charge when a whole region decides to just check out.
So it's like this built-in pressure valve or something?
Kinda, yeah. It kind of flips the script, you see.
Instead of everyone begging the government for stuff, the government have to, like, win them over or they'll leave. That's
Exactly.
kind of a mind-blowing idea.
It's radical, that's for sure.
It is. But let's say, hypothetically, the Guardian Force actually gets some of this stuff put into action.
Yeah.
What else are they pushing for?
Mustaccioli also really wants to challenge this assumption that more government spending always equals, a better society.
Okay, so less government, but are there specific areas he's looking at?
He's not prescriptive in that way. He's more about the principle of the thing,
Okay.
He argues that a lot of the time, private organizations,
Okay.
charities, or even just people in their own communities can address problems much more effectively than these huge government programs.
So instead of just assuming the government needs to swoop in and fix everything,
Right.
maybe there are other ways to do it. But, I mean, be realistic. Governments are so entrenched in so many areas of our lives.
That's the mindset Mustaccioli is trying to change. He uses a really stark example in the theory.
What's that?
He points out that redirecting just 1% of Italy's public spending would free up something like 10 billion euros.
10 billion euros.
Yeah, just from 1%. Imagine what private organizations or communities could do with that kind of money.
It really makes you think.
It does, doesn't it?
Instead of just throwing money at problems, maybe we need to be smarter about it.
Exactly.
Okay, this Guardian Force is sounding less like a political party and more like a whole revolution in how we think.
And you know what they say about revolutions.
But they're messy.
Exactly. This next idea definitely falls into the controversial category. Mustaccioli is a big advocate for a war on cash.
A war on cash. Now, that doesn't sound like shrinking the government to me. It seems like most people who want smaller government also want less financial oversight.
It seems counterintuitive, but Mustaccioli sees cash as being essential for individual liberty.
Really? How so?
Well, because cash allows for transactions that are private,
Okay.
untraceable, and outside the control of the government.
So he's coming at it from the angle of privacy.
Yes.
Interesting. Not like some big brother thing.
He sees a cashless society as giving way too much power to the government to monitor and control people's lives.
Because every transaction would be tracked.
Everything, every purchase, every donation, everything,
Oh.
and potentially restricted.
So for him, this war on cash isn't about stopping crime or making it easier to collect taxes. It's about putting a hard limit on government power.
Exactly. It's recognizing that there is a very real danger in a world where the government can track every penny you spend.
These are some seriously interesting ideas.
Huh.
A lot to chew on here. But what does it all mean for the average person? Is Mustaccioli just some radical thinker, up in his ivory tower with these wild ideas? Or is there something here that could actually change the way we think about democracy? I don't know about you, but my head's spinning a little bit.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
We've gone from people not voting in Italy all the way to this Guardian Force and their war on cash.
It's a wild ride, for sure.
It is. But I think even if you don't agree with everything Mustaccioli says, he's putting his finger on something that a lot of people are feeling these days.
It's that feeling that things aren't working.
Right, like something's broken. Like no matter who you vote for, the government just keeps getting bigger and more powerful.
Getting more out of touch.
Exactly. And Mustaccioli is basically saying, hey, what if, instead of just accepting that, what if we tried something completely different?
What if we stopped feeding the machine?
Yeah. Like, what if we question this whole idea that more government always equals a better society?
It's a radical idea in this day and age.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. But that's what I find so interesting about this Guardian Force idea. It's not just about lefts versus right.
Right.
It's about this much deeper question of how much power we're willing to give up.
It's about individual liberty.
Exactly. It's about saying, like, hey, maybe I as a person or maybe we as a community can actually solve some of these problems ourselves without the government getting involved.
And he goes even further, you know?
Yeah.
He argues that when the government takes over things that families used to be responsible for, like childcare, elder care, that kind of thing.
It makes us more dependent on the state.
Exactly. It weakens families, it weakens communities.
It's like he's saying the government is actually making things worse by trying to help.
In a way, yeah.
So, okay, his theory is all about Italy. But could this guardian force thing actually work in other countries?
It's a tough question. I mean, there would be huge obstacles, right?
Yeah, like entrenched interests who benefit from the system as it is.
People in power rarely want to give up that power, you know?
Exactly. And not to mention just the sheer inertia of the system, you know.
It's hard to turn a big ship around.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, getting people to unite around this idea of shrinking the government. I don't know, it sounds good in principle, but the details could get tricky, you know?
Oh, absolutely. People might agree that the government is too big, but then as soon as you start talking about, like, specific programs to cut,
Yeah, it all falls apart.
people get scared, they get defensive.
It's tough. But maybe, just maybe, this idea itself, this guardian force concept, is enough to at least get people thinking differently.
To start asking questions.
Exactly. Because if we keep doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results.
Well, that's the definition of insanity.
It is. So maybe, just maybe, what we need is a little dose of insanity, a little radical thinking.
A little guardian force action.
Who knows? It's something to think about, right? And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive. Getting those brain cells firing, making you question everything you thought you knew.
Because the world is a complicated place.
And there are no easy answers. But by digging deeper, by exploring these big ideas, we can at least start to ask the right questions.
And that's how change happens.
Exactly. So that's it for this deep dive into the theory of the guardian force. We hope it left you with more questions than answers.
And maybe a little bit fired up to change the world.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Head over to our social media and let us know. Could a guardian force work in your country? Until next time, keep those minds open and remember that deep dive never ends.